Oh, and just to raise your blood pressure one more notch, Lindsey Graham bombed Tehran. He says that Joe Biden bombed Tehran. Oh, I wonder what Vladimir Putin would do about that. Crazy. These people are out of their minds, Gerald.
You nailed it. They're out of their minds. They're out of their minds. We have evil, demonic people that are running and ruining life on Earth.
As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
House Speaker Mike Johnson betrayed liberty and the Constitution by making a full court press to get a clean reauthorization of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act through the House. Section 702 authorizes warrantless surveillance of foreign citizens. When the FISA Act was passed, surveillance state boosters promised that 702 warrantless surveillances would never be used against American citizens. However, intelligence agencies have used a loophole in 702, allowing them to subject to warrantless surveillance any American who communicated with a non-U.S. citizen who was a 702 target. Intelligence agencies could then also conduct warrantless surveillance on any Americans who communicated with the new American target. This Section 702 loophole has been used too often to subject Americans to warrantless wiretapping that it has been referred to as the surveillance state's crown jewel. A partisan coalition of Republican and Democratic House members worked to add a warrant requirement to the FISA bill. Speaker Johnson agreed to allow a vote on the House floor on an amendment requiring federal officials to get a warrant before subjecting any Americans to surveillance. However, he publicly opposed the amendment, as did President Biden. Prominent deep state operatives such as former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo also lobbied against the amendment. The case against adding a warrant requirement to FISA consisted of hysterical claims that forcing the surveillance state to obey the Fourth Amendment would make Americans vulnerable to terrorist attacks. Particularly, the claim was made that forcing national security operatives to get a warrant before spying on U.S. citizens would cripple the ability to respond to a ticking time bomb situation. Those claims were debunked by the heroic Edward Snowden, who made the American people aware of the extent of warrantless surveillance. Snowden, who worked as a government contractor for the National Security Agency, posted in a message on X, formerly known as Twitter, that the warrant amendment would not stop federal agencies from acting without a warrant in a ticking time bomb situation. A vote was held Friday afternoon on the amendment requiring a warrant before Section 702 powers would be used to spy on American citizens. Despite the fear-mongering by Mike Pompeo and others, as well as the opposition of both President Biden and Speaker Johnson, the amendment failed to pass by only one vote. The amendment would have passed had Speaker Johnson not cast a rare floor vote. Speakers usually do not vote on legislation against the amendment. When the Patriot Act was rushed to the House floor in the fall of 2001, weeks after 9/11, and voted upon before members had a chance to read it, only 3 Republicans voted against it. One conservative representative told me he voted for it even though he agreed with my opposition to the bill. He told me, "I can't go back home and tell my constituents I voted against the Patriot Act." While the failure to pass the warrant amendment was dispiriting, the fact that it failed by only one vote shows how much progress we have made. It should thus inspire us to keep encouraging Congress to refuse to take away real liberty in the name of promises of phantom security. Thanks for listening.
So Israeli sources told CNN that Iran's reprisal attack on Israel has delayed Israeli plans to invade the southern Gaza city of Rafah. So according to these sources, the Israeli Air Force was actually set to drop leaflets on Rafah on Monday to tell the more than 1 million civilians who are in the city that an offensive was coming. But this plan was put on hold as the Israeli War Cabinet is debating how to respond to Iran firing over 300 missiles and drones at Israeli territory, which, of course, was in response to Israel bombing Iran's consulate in Damascus. So this tells us a few things. If the Israeli Air Force was ready to drop these leaflets to set in motion the invasion of Rafah, this goes to show that we keep seeing U.S. officials say that they're against Israel invading Rafah, that they can't do it until they come up with a plan for all the civilians that are there. So if they're planning to just drop leaflets, if that's their big plan, I mean, that goes to show that the U.S. isn't actually putting any pressure on Israel not to do this if they had this planned out. And it goes to show, again, that we've seen U.S. officials say very recently that they've been asking Israel for a plan for the civilians that are there, and they haven't given them anything. So if this is the great plan, we saw them do this in other parts of Gaza. They drop leaflets. People don't know where to go, especially now that most places are completely destroyed. There's no place that has the capacity for all these people. So this isn't a plan at all. This would just be them saying, "See, look, we told them, we warned them," and then they would go ahead with the invasion anyway. I'm sure that's what they plan to do. So the Israeli sources told CNN that they still plan to launch a full-scale assault on Rafah, but they're not sure when it's going to happen. And the Israeli War Cabinet is focusing on how to respond to Iran and has agreed that an attack will happen, but it is unclear where or when. So, of course, invasion of Rafah would incur huge civilian casualties with all the people that are sheltering there. I know some have left to go back to Khan Yunis, but I'm not sure how many, and Khan Yunis is almost completely destroyed, so there wasn't much to go back to there. But still, there'd be huge civilian casualties, and it would disrupt the aid shipments coming from Egypt that enter Gaza through the Rafah border crossing. So it would just be a huge disaster. And then I just put the latest number from Gaza's health ministry. They said on Monday that at least 33,797 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since October 7th, and that does not take into account the thousands of Palestinians who are missing and presumed to be dead under the rubble. And we had this warning from experts who are saying that if conditions don't change due to both the military offensive and starvation and also disease that is spreading, they believe over 100,000 people will die by August. And they actually say if there is a military escalation, if there is something like an invasion of Rafah, they expect the death toll to be over 120,000 by August. So a very bleak outlook for the situation in Gaza. So House Speaker Mike Johnson called himself a wartime speaker on Tuesday as he defended himself after Representative Thomas Massie called for his resignation over a plan to hold separate votes on military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. So Johnson said at a press conference, "We need steady leadership. We need steady hands on the wheel. Look, I regard myself as a wartime speaker," end quote. A wartime speaker. So Massie, who's from Kentucky, he's a Republican, he said that he would back Marjorie Taylor Greene's plan to file a motion to vacate, which would trigger a vote to oust Johnson as speaker. And so if every Democrat votes against Johnson, only 2 Republicans would need to vote to oust him because the House lost a couple Republicans who resigned recently. So several House Democrats have said basically that they wouldn't vote. They would bail Johnson out. They would not vote to kick him out of the speakership if the bills that he puts forward are up to the $95 billion. So you have that $95 billion foreign military aid bill that Biden wants that was passed in the Senate. The House Democrats are saying, all right, if these individual bills that you put up add up to everything that we want, then we will not vote to oust you if this happens. So the Democrats are saying that they'll bail Johnson out, essentially. And Johnson's saying, he's going to go through with it. And now there's other Republicans who have expressed anger at this plan because there's no border stuff here. If you remember the original, that $95 billion was stripped out of like a $118 billion bill that included all this new border stuff that the Republicans and Democrats negotiated. Johnson said he wasn't going to bring it through the House because they weren't happy with it in the House. But now they're going to give him all the military aid without getting any concessions on the border stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. And Johnson is planning to put forward a 4th bill, as if these 3 aren't bad enough. And this 4th bill would include a TikTok ban and could also potentially give the government the power to sell frozen Russian assets and give them to Ukraine to carry out that plan. So just bad on top of bad legislation here that Johnson is ready to go through. And the White House says that, it looks like they're on board with Johnson's plan. They say that they like it. So Biden's happy about what he's doing. He's got the Democrats willing to bail him out. And of course, it seems like just a few Republicans might try to kick him out over this. So far it's only Green and Massie that have come out publicly in favor of having a vote to get rid of him.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
So this guy that I never heard of, a young man, held a rally in front of a police station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, protesting excessive use of force by the police. I don't know if there's excessive use of force there, if it was political, it doesn't matter. And he harangued the crowd. Somebody in the crowd, unknown and unseen, threw a rock, and the rock hit one of the police officers who was monitoring the rally. The police officers sued the speaker because they don't know who threw the rock. The police officers' lawyers admit the speaker did not encourage violence, did not command violence, did not use violent language, and certainly didn't throw the rock. He was up there speaking when the rock was hurled. The trial court threw it out before it reached the jury. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the intermediate appellate court in the federal system for Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, reinstated the case. And last week, the Supreme Court refused to get involved.
Holy Jesus.
How could in the American system, where you have the right to think as you wish, to say what you think, to read what you want, to publish what you say, and to do it in concert with others? That's the freedom of assembly. What good is the freedom of speech if there's no audience? To do it in concert with others. All this is not only a natural right, it's expressly protected by the Constitution. By making this guy potentially liable because of what an unknown, unnamed, unseen assailant did, they have effectively chilled the freedom of speech in those three states. It's beyond me.
I mean, it's week after week about all our loss of rights, and it just keeps getting worse.
Last week, since you and I spoke, the House passed an extension of 702 of FISA, which allows federal agents to spy on foreign persons without warrants and the Americans with whom they speak. Congressman Andy Biggs, a great defender of civil liberties, introduced a simple piece of legislation to require the feds to get search warrants before they surveil Americans. That amendment was tied on the floor of the House, 212 in favor, 212 against. The conservative Republican Speaker of the House left the chair, went down into the well of the House and voted against the amendment, and so it lost. And the legislation passed. After the legislation passed, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee and his Democratic counterpart, two thugs that are in the back pockets of the intelligence community, the American spies, added two sentences. Senator Mike Lee discovered this yesterday and has exposed it on the floor of the Senate. Added two sentences to the legislation, allowing the government to command your cable television carrier to give it access to the wires going into your house.
Oh.
That's where we are.
And, this is an example of the hypocrisy of the news and how ridiculous most of it is. The one person after another, Schultz over there in Germany, Chancellor Schultz condemns Iran's attack on Israel. UN's Guterres condemns Iran attack on Israel, calls for UNSC to take action. How come they never condemn Israel's attack on Iran?
Well, Israel's attack on Iran, A, murdered 2 generals, B, killed 13 other civilians, C, was the destruction of a consulate attack to an embassy, which is absolutely protected even in wartime under international law, specifically the Geneva Conventions, to which Israel is a signatory. Iran's retaliation, A, they told the United States when it was going to come. B, they told Israel when it was going to come. C, they surgically attacked military and industrial sites. If you believe the mainstream media, Israel stopped everything. If you believe the truth, as it has eventually made its way out, 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles got through, destroyed an Israeli intelligence headquarters. People had evacuated because the Iranians gave notice, and rendered 2 military airports useless. And the West is making it sound as though Iran was the aggressor. I'm smiling because it's so absurd that they would expect us to believe this nonsense.
Again, go to Judging Freedom. He had Scott Ritter on your head. You had Colonel Douglas McGregor. These are 2 pros that really know this stuff, talking about the success of the Iranian attack. And people have no idea because the media sells it a whole nother way. Israel stopped 99% of the drones and missiles coming in. That's the headline news. And again, Scott Ritter really makes it clear on exactly what they did, how they did it, and the success of the Iranians. And by the way, this is from the Israeli news. It cost Israel $1.3 billion in weaponry to knock this stuff out. $1.3 billion. It cost Iran 10% of that.
Correct. You're exactly correct.
And again, World War III has begun, and it's only going to get worse. It's going to be interesting to see what Israel does in retaliation for the attack by Iran. Because if they retaliate at any significant level, this is going to escalate things beyond the control of anybody.
I do think to understand these things, it's always worthwhile to put yourself in their shoes. And so from the Iranian perspective, you have to understand that after 9/11, George W. Bush labeled Iran, Iraq, and North Korea the, what did he call it? The axis of evil. And there were loud calls throughout the entire George W. Bush administration for war with Iran. And in fact, Dick Cheney tried to get it done, but it was too late in the George W. Bush administration, and all of his advice had been so disastrous so far that nobody was listening to him anymore at that point. But we did invade two of their neighbors. Like, if you could picture Iran on a map and then think about where Iraq and Afghanistan are, these are both countries that are touching Iran. And so we invaded both of those countries and just totally wrecked the place. And that is, however you feel about who the good guys and who the bad guys are here, that's the perspective that Iran was coming from. That, oh, these guys are talking about invading us and they just did it to both of our neighbors. It's very difficult for Americans to truly appreciate that perspective, right? Like, if you were in a situation where some country that was much more powerful than us was blaming us for an attack that we had nothing to do with, or at least putting us on this list of evil countries right after, imagine there was some attack, none of us had anything to do with it, and they said Mexico, the United States of America, and Canada are these three evil countries, and then they went and invaded Mexico and Canada. And we're just sitting here like, whoa. So that more or less is the position that Iran is in, or has been in. And I think it's reasonable to say that they've been signaling for quite a while that they do not want it. Like, we do not want this war. We do not want America to invade us. Of course, Iran could do a lot of damage to a lot of our military in the region, but we could do a lot more damage to them. When Netanyahu was testifying there in 2002, we just saw the first words of his of the clip that we just played was, "If you take out Saddam, all these great things are going to happen." And Netanyahu wasn't coming to America and saying, "Just let us take out Saddam, and then let us go attack Iran." You know what I mean? Just get out of our way, and we'll handle this mess for you. He's like, no, you handle this mess for me. You guys, you send your boys to go fight and die there. No, I'm sorry. Like, that is as anti-America first as anything that George W. Bush or Barack Obama or John McCain or any of them stood for. So to me, like, my response to Will's point is that I just go like, hey, fine. If you're going to say, oh, you can't stand with Iran and be America first, all right, fine. But you can't stand with Israel either. The two things are just not compatible. And that doesn't, people are so trained at this point to think that if you say something like that, that means you hate Jewish people, or that means whatever it is, you're pro-Hamas or something stupid like this. But that's just not right. None of that's true. And I also I certainly root, and I'm sure you do too, Rob, and you have more connections to the state of Israel than I do. But I certainly I root for everybody in Israel, to all the civilian population. I root for them to all have peace and prosperity and all that. I don't want to see any innocent people get killed. But they gotta the standard can't be that we have to unconditionally support Israel, and then in the middle of this white hot situation, our president, as embarrassing as he is going to go, all right, just take the win, don't retaliate. And they go, nah, screw you. We're retaliating. And then you still, as a response to that, somehow we can't muster the political ability to just go, okay, then you don't get our support. All right, fine. But then we're not propping this whole thing up. If you won't even listen to us, If you won't even go like when we go, hey, please, like stop killing so many goddamn civilians, wrap this war up. And they're like, nope, as long as it takes, it takes. Please don't retaliate to Iran. Nope, we're going to retaliate. It's like, all right, what's the obvious answer there then? It's like we have no way of setting any type of boundaries on our support. It just must be unconditional. No, that doesn't seem right. No. Any thoughts, Rob?
Well, I do like the Republicans trying to drum up the look at how emboldened Iran is, and this is because you sent them the money, and this is the first time direct attacks. This is escalating, trying to sell it like this one's a Biden failure.
Yeah. Well, right. Yeah. I mean, I see all that stuff. Whenever you're in a presidential election year, you can always count on things to just be really dumb.
Right.
So there's just like a whole lot of Trump supporters like this would never happen if Donald Trump was president. And they say the same thing about Putin, invading Ukraine and stuff like that. And it's just like, I mean, look, obviously, like there would be different variables. There'd be a different cabinet. There'd be a lot of these things. But it's just like, there is no reason whatsoever to think that October 7th wouldn't have happened if Donald Trump was president. Like, what? Hamas
the Gazans love me. They would do it. Not
like
with
Hamas
me here.
was gonna just like be like, man, we sure would love to execute this plan, but I don't know. Donald Trump's sitting in the White House, so we can't do this.
And today, on the anniversary of his death, I've got Ben Franklin's 20 rules for reducing a massive empire to a small one. Back in 1773, on the other September 11th, Benjamin Franklin had some hopes of still convincing the people of Britain to see the results of the actions of their own government, of Parliament's actions, through the eyes of the people in the colony. So he published a satire in a very widely read British paper, The Public Advertiser. This was, I think it was a London publication, and it was titled Rules by Which a Great Empire May be Reduced to a Small One. Let's go through these 20 rules, and I'm going to give you little bits and pieces of them. Of course, I encourage you to read this document in full on your own time. It's really just fun, interesting stuff, but I want to also give my own take on what he's saying here as well. So number 3, if any of them have revolutionary views, radical takes, make sure to punish them. You need to shut this down quickly. If they happen to be zealous Whigs, he said, friends of liberty, nurtured in revolution principles, remember all that to their prejudice and contrive to punish it. For such principles, after a revolution is thoroughly established, are of no more use. They are even odious and abominable. Then we're going to get into some of the really juicy stuff, like, of course, tax them into oblivion. And that's number 8. Just tax them and tax them and tax them. He said, resolve to harass them with novel taxes. They will petition for redress. Let the parliaments flout their claims, reject their petitions, refuse even to suffer the reading of them, and treat the petitioners with the utmost contempt. So tax them and spend and just take all their money, and when people complain, blow them off. Treat them with contempt. See them as an enemy. And then on top of it, number 9 is remind them that just because you're taxing them with this, that's not the end of the story. You can tax them as much as you want, whenever you want, however you want. He said, remember to make your arbitrary tax more grievous to your provinces by public declarations importing that your power of taxing them has no limits, so that when you take from them without their consent a shilling in the pound, you have a clear right to the other 19. So no matter what they take, it's their view, of course, that they can take 100% whenever they want. They've just decided to be good to you to only take maybe 5% or something. So tax them to oblivion, remind them that you can tax them even more if you need to or if you want to. And then number 10 is, well, regulate them into oblivion. You have so many regulations that it becomes impossible to be prosperous. He said, begin by laws to perplex their commerce with infinite regulations impossible to be remembered and observed. And if you think about, there's a book that I still have yet to read, 3 Laws a Day. I can't remember who wrote it, but it's been recommended to me so many times. And it basically is a study that the average person today, in essence, is violating 3 federal laws or regulations every single day, and they don't even know it. That's because there are so many tens of thousands of them on the books that it's impossible to know everything that government is doing. It's impossible to know what all the rules that government has for you. And this makes it impossible to actually, well, just like what? Keep them impossible to be remembered and observed. Now, wait, there's more than just regulating them into oblivion. There's this. Order seizures of their property for every failure. Take away the trial of such property by jury and give it to arbitrary judges of your own appointing and of the lowest characters in the country, whose salaries and emoluments are to arise out of the duties or condemnations, and whose appointments are during pleasure, so up to you. Then let there be a formal declaration of both houses that opposition to your edicts is treason. So regulate them into oblivion. And then on top of it, this is also number 10. Make sure that this isn't the end of the story. So no matter how much you tax them, remind them that you can tax them more. No matter how much you regulate them, no matter how much you claim the power or you take action to take their stuff, use civil asset forfeiture, for example, remind them that your power is actually limitless. This is all making up number 9, 8, 9, and 10. He said, and lest the people should think you cannot possibly go any farther, pass another solemn declaratory act that kings, lords, and commons had, hath, and of right ought to have full power and authority to make statutes of sufficient force and validity to bind the unrepresented provinces in all cases whatsoever. Number 14, this will also sound familiar. Shut down free speech and free assembly. He said, if the parliaments of your provinces should dare to claim rights or complain of your administration, order them to be harassed with repeated dissolutions. So even though he's only addressing the representatives of the colonies, the colonial parliaments, the colonial legislatures, the message is really the same. If these are the people that are standing up and speaking out, make sure you shut down any opportunity for them to complain about attacks on their rights. Make sure you shut down any way for them to meet and organize. Number 15, again, back to stealing people's stuff. This isn't specifically taxation this time, but is using asset forfeiture as much as possible. And use people who have fought in wars to be your enforcement officer. He said, convert the brave, honest officers of your Navy into pimping tide waiters and colony officers of the customs. Let those who in time of war fought gallantly in defense of the commerce of their countrymen in peace be taught to prey upon it. He said, stop and detain every coaster, every wood boat, every fisherman, tumble their cargoes and even their ballast inside out and upside down. And if a pennyworth of pins is found, I don't know what that term means, but it's linked to, I guess we could read about it. It basically, I'm just reading from the context here. If just the tiniest illegal thing is found, let the whole be seized and confiscated. Thus shall the trade of your colonists suffer more from their friends in times of peace than it did from their enemies in war.
Which I just read to the Senate means that if you have access to any communications, the government can force you to help it spy. That means anybody with access to a server, a wire, a cable box, a Wi-Fi router, a phone, or a computer. So think for a moment about the millions of Americans who work in buildings and offices in which communications are stored or passed through. After all, every office building in America has data cables running through it. The people are not just the engineers who install, maintain, and repair our communications infrastructure. There are countless others who could be forced to help the government spy, including those who clean offices and guard buildings. If this provision is enacted, the government can deputize any of these people against their will and force them, in effect, to become what amounts to an agent for Big Brother. For example, by forcing an employee to insert a USB thumb drive into a server at an office they clean or guard at night. This can all happen without any oversight whatsoever. The FISA court won't know about it. The Congress won't know about it. Americans who are handed these directives will be forbidden from talking about it.
So that's just incredible. The person who cleans the building at night can be forced to insert a thumb drive and download all the data of an employee, and that he or she cannot tell anyone about it, and the government will force them to spy on Americans. I can't believe it.
When I was listening to this and reading what's going on, I keep thinking back to our first experience with this type of issue, and my comment to myself was, it all started with the Patriot Act.
Sure did.
This had terrorized the nation, and now there's even questions exactly how all the buildings fell down on 9/11. But anyway, the motivation was there, and we've talked about that so many times. And this is, a continuation of that. And it is much more strategic and bigger than Republicans and Democrats. And this is why it's great to see Ron Wyden do this, because the deep state, the people who really control things, are the ones that seem to be in these places. They have infiltrated a lot more than anybody realizes. Sometimes more than I ever thought possible. I'm always suspicious, but this kind of stuff is, how do they manage to do this? And the sad part is there's a lot of sincere people, both probably on the progressive left and the Republican side, that really don't want to participate in that. But are they going to wake up and say, boy, did I mess up? We had a close vote on an important part of the FISA, and it passed anyway. Are we going to wake up and do it? We don't have enough Walter Jones there and say, my gosh, I was completely wrong on this. But are they going to wake up and do this? So I guess part of our responsibility is hopefully waking people up, because that's the only thing that will happen. And I keep thinking of the example, we saw it in a minor way, but significant way with COVID. People woke up, and yet the danger there is still existing. So this is something that I think people have to see the big picture as well.
Well, you remember what they did during the Patriot Act time. They said, we're at war, Ron. This is no time to be whining about civil liberties.
Yeah,
and that's
right.
how they rammed it through. We're at war. They love to say that because that shows that you somehow don't care about the country. And in fact, you may even be working for the other side. But let's look into some of the details of this. And I don't want to get too deep into the trees, but I think it's worth looking at. Now, this is courtesy of the woman who, I don't have her name in front of me right now. She runs the Brennan Center, and she's absolutely terrific. But here's some of her analysis of it. And she said, under current law, the government can compel electronic communication service providers that have direct access to communications to assist the NSA in conducting the 702 surveillance. That means companies like Verizon and Google must turn over communication to the targets of that surveillance. But through a seemingly innocuous change to the definition of electronic communications surveillance provider, an amendment offered by the House Intel Committee leaders and passed by the House vastly expands the universe of entities that can be compelled to assist the NSA. Compelled to assist. Now, this is what they did. They expanded it. It used to be just your Verizon, just your Google, just the guys who have that. It expands it. And then she goes on, if the bill becomes law, any company or individual that provides any service whatsoever may be forced to assist in NSA surveillance as long as they have access to the equipment on which communications are transmitted abroad. So it sweeps an enormous range of U.S. businesses that will to provide Wi-Fi to their customers. So it also includes commercial landlords that rent out the office space where tens of millions of Americans go to work each day. And I'm sorry to go further, but if we can just do one more, I think it's so important, and I've highlighted this. The amendment even extends to service providers to come into our homes, house cleaners, plumbers, people performing repairs, IT services, people who have access to laptops. None of these people or businesses would be allowed to tell anyone about the assistance that they were compelled to provide. And she says that's not even the worst part. Unlike Google and Verizon, most of these businesses and individuals lack the ability to isolate and turn over a target's communications. So they would be required to give the NSA access to the equipment itself or use techniques or devices to copy and turn over entire communication streams and or repositories of stored communications. This is wholly domestic communications. But don't worry, Dr. Paul, the NSA having access to this would be on the honor system to pool out and retain only the communications of approved foreign targets.
Oh, thank goodness for that, because we can trust them too,
We
right?
can trust them, yeah, absolutely.
In the 20th century, there were a lot of governments that had moved. It was a terrible century for world wars and the concept of the police state.
Yes.
And it got pretty vicious. And fortunately, we're not there yet, but unfortunately, we're moving in that direction. I see this, if this stands, this is a tremendous victory for the police state.
Yes.
And so often in past times, people would say, how did the people go along with this? Why did they do it? There were a lot of good people in Japan and Germany and Italy and all these places, and yet they still went along with it. But here's an example of it. They don't keep their guard up, and they're taught to be obedient to anything that sounds like patriotism, and they go along with it. But I think this is a tremendous victory, if it stands, for the police state, and a real defeat for the concept of the republic, the concept of liberty, and the people on the side of let the truth bear it out, and let us stand by the truth, because that is what is necessary. And this is denial of it. Yeah. And so it is a challenge. Most people that we bump into say that they can even be more pessimistic. Don't even pretend there's a Constitution. Yeah. And later on, we'll be talking about the First Amendment again. Yeah. And this is a First Amendment issue too. You know, they tell you do this, and you can't even talk about it. Yeah. So it's pretty bad. But we have to know who the enemy is and what we have to do. And if it is a police state on our doorsteps, we're already stepping in. I'll tell you what, we better wake up and respond to it.